Good morning and welcome welcome to this exciting session. Thank you for your patience. Thank you to all of those who are standing. We always think that's it's a nice problem to have, and we will do our very best to respect your time, the contributions of the participants, and remain on schedule. I'm very honored to be back at the Gaidar Forum in this special anniversary year. My name is Tim Mescon. I am Executive Vice President and Chief Officer for AACSB. I live in Amsterdam, and I work with our member schools in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. So it's a really, see many friends here, and it's really a great pleasure to be with you. Today's session, as you know, what management education will, I love this, will real business need in the future? And we have a spectacular panel of academics, and business representatives, accreditors. It's a fantastic mix, and you will get many, many perspectives, and hope will be great, as we say, food for thought in terms of mapping the business education landscape moving forward. A little bit about logistics. I am joined by the first four panelists. They will each have a brief up to 10-minute presentation. When they are finished, they will step down, and our final three panelists will step up. So we'll have a brief change, maybe a little music, Ashot, if that's okay, while we're changing. Thank you, thank you. And then I will wrap up the session. Very honored to begin this session with a long-term friend, Dean Alan Amason from Georgia Southern University, and his perspectives on this changing landscape of business education. Alan is very involved internationally, working with a number of schools worldwide, and looking forward to your presentation. So if each of you will make sure to turn your microphones on as well, very important for the for our translators and others, and we will get started.
Greetings. Thank you, Tim. Thank you all for being here. It's an honor to be back at RANEPA. It's an honor to be here to speak to you. I'll begin by apologizing for my appearance. I arrived late last night. My understanding is that my luggage is scheduled to arrive tomorrow. So it is what it is. We'll focus on the topic and not on my apparel. The topic for me. The topic is one very near my heart. Many of you perhaps know that I've visited here before and have spoken to the faculty and some of the students here before about the future of business schools, and I'm very concerned about our profession, and so I titled this "The Business of Business Schools," and will explain very briefly what it is that concerns me and what I believe I see as the future. First, a little bit of background. I've been doing what I do for 27 years. I've worked at 3 universities. I've lectured at universities on 4 continents. I have a Google Scholar citation base of nearly 10,000 citations. I've won teaching awards. I've been the editor of journals and on journal boards. I say all this not to impress you, but to convince you that I'm a member of this family. I am an academic's academic. I believe in what we do, and I've invested my life doing it and trying to do it well. And yet I'm terribly concerned that we face worldwide a crisis that we do not recognize in higher education. Specifically, our degrees are questioned for their marginal value. Our schools are driven by a need for cash flow to the point that we have begun to, I think, dilute somewhat the value of our brands and the value of our degrees. And that's created a crisis on the part of the population, on the part of society, where people are questioning whether or not the cost and the debt that's oftentimes incurred in that cost is worth it. And what it has created for schools is what I call an arms race for rankings. I like to joke that there are 100 schools that are ranked in the top 25. This is possible because everybody ranks something, and everyone seizes on some part of some ranking as being essential to their identity. And they use that ranking to drive prestige, to drive enrollment, because they need the revenue, all of which tends to dilute the value of what they're actually contributing in terms of the value that the business school creates. So to address this, and it's something that's been on my mind and on my heart for a number of years, to address this, I've thought about what the future portends and where we're going as a profession. I see a widening gap between how we view ourselves as academics and what we actually do. Many of my friends who are outstanding and talented scholars do not view themselves as being responsible for the application of their scholarship, nor do they view themselves as teachers. In fact, many of the best scholars in our business don't teach at all. We see increased value being placed on credentialing alone rather than on the educational value of what we add. In other words, you're better served to buy a degree from a highly prestigious school than to earn a degree from a less prestigious school. We saw this in a tremendous scandal in the United States recently, where parents were buying admission for their children into very prestigious schools to which they couldn't be admitted otherwise. The simple credentialing without the added value of the education will eventually undermine and create a house of cards of the educational process we've built or industry we've built. And so we've created what I consider to be a scholarly echo chamber, where we simply measure our value based on our impact on other scholars. If people think you are important, then you are important without any particular hard measure of that importance. If people believe you're prestigious, then you are prestigious without any particular measure of that prestige, other than the mounting evidence of greater prestige, which you can see is something of a house of cards that one day could very easily collapse and have society turn its back on business education generally. So I've built this idea of mine around, or the future, my vision of the future, around three basic principles that I think business schools should attend. You can see them here: connecting theory and practice, the absolute value of research, and better connection to the market. Each one I'll explain very briefly, just so that you get a sense of what I'm talking about, and hopefully it'll plant in your mind a seed that provokes some further thinking. Kurt Lewin, the famous social psychologist, said in 1945, "Nothing so practical as a good theory." Theory should yield better practice. And to the extent that the people who create and test and refine theory see themselves as not responsible for the application of that theory, theory gets farther from practice and both get worse as a result. And I think that's a problem. So I believe it's our responsibility as academics and good academics to do good work, but to also have a good answer to the so what question. Anytime I interact with people outside of our discipline and I tell them what they do or what I do, and they ask the question, so what? Well, that should not be an insult to me. I should be able to answer that question and in a language that they can understand. To the extent that I do not accept that responsibility, I believe that we as a profession get worse. The value of research. I think important research is driven by important phenomena. Things that matter, questions that matter, provoke the sort of research that matters. And so whether you're a polished researcher, a graduate student, the editor of a journal, you should look to the world of business for the important questions that drive business research. Again, I have a large number of friends who are some of the world's well-known researchers at some of the world's well-known universities. The vast majority of them do not see the business world as a place for meaningful questions. They see the body of theory as the driver of meaningful questions. The problem is that creates an echo chamber, a self-reinforcing cycle where the things we think are important are not the things that our constituency believes is important. And so we should focus on research that matters by asking ourselves, who's the audience? AACSB measures schools in terms of the impact they have, and I ask the question, is it enough to have impact if you're only having impact on others in your discipline? Does our impact have to spread outside of our discipline into the world of practice? I believe it does, and if it doesn't, I believe we're in danger as a profession. The last piece then is connection to the marketplace. Necessity is the mother of invention. It's actually said by Benjamin Jowett in 1871 in a translation of Plato's Republic. It's more of a paraphrase than a translation. But it is Plato's idea that when something is necessary, that invention arises to meet it. And I find that a connection to the market keeps that hunger for invention alive. We're producing products that are valued by the marketplace, or at least we should be. If the marketplace isn't valuing what we do outside of merely the credentialing value, then it begs the question whether or not we're actually producing the value we believe we should produce. And so I think schools do well to build strong market connections. I actually authored a piece recently that the AACSB published where I talked about the urgency or the sense of urgency in the business schools that I've visited in the Russian Federation and across the CIS, the urgency to do something that matters, because it was really about survival. It was about creating the value that is important to survive. That's not a pressure we oftentimes feel in universities in the U.S., and I think we're worse off for it, because that market connection builds a strong sense of urgency, a strong sense of vitality, and also keeps us focused on the important metrics of success. And so my three ideas, or my three responses to what's the business of a business school. The first is to connect theory to practice. The second is to research with a positive absolute value, to do research that creates a positive absolute value. And the third is to connect and serve the market. To the extent we do any of those things poorly, I think our profession is tending in the wrong direction for the future. So that's it for me. I thank you for listening. I thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Alan, a great start. We often say that the best business schools in the world operate at the intersection of theory and practice, and that's exactly what you emphasized, and thank you for kicking us off. I also want to mention, Alan did not reference the Parker name of his College of Business. We talked a little bit yesterday at the RANEPA International Advisory Council about this connectivity where it results in financial support from the corporate sector. And Alan, as dean, orchestrated a fantastic gift to create the Parker College, and a very important reinforcement of that link with the corporate world. So thank you again. Now I'm very proud to welcome Vladimir Aronchik. Vladimir is currently the Director of Cooperation Programs at Rosatom State Corporation. Vladimir, thank you for very much for joining us, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, thank you for the invitation. And thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. And I'm happy to say that the first of thing which I feel here, it's a testing bed for the soft skills. And I'm sorry, I'll speak Russian because it would be a little bit more speedy to explain the things which I have to say.
Hi. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in order to emphasize what I'm about to say, let me start with a joke, if that's okay. So this one is about a modern ship where the captain goes out on the deck in the morning, and he's actually about to embark. And so he commands, "Raise the sails." And the crew tells him, "Well, are you aware, sir, that we no longer have the sails? We've got an electric engine." And he says, "Okay, then raise the electric engine." So what does that imply? Well, obviously, leaders today would want to trust their crew, right? This leader obviously trusts his crew entirely. At the same time, management tools and methods that he is used to are probably not the best ones for the current situation. And I think that this is a pretty good description for what's happening in the world of business education. Well, the word demand came out pretty strongly in the presentations of my colleagues. And in fact, when we talk about the prospects of any business idea, this is a question that is asked in most cases. Is this the result of R&D that we are trying to impose on the population? Or does it come from the business? That is, do we know there is effective demand for it or not? Now let's turn to the question at hand. Imagine you are investors. Actually, I realize that we have many investors in the room, so it's easy for you to imagine that. Now you're an investor, you meet a startup, they tell you, "We've studied the market, we have found our first customer, he is happy to part with his money once we show a working prototype, which we don't have. But we do have a great team. You know, these are very talented people. They've pulled off great projects before. Nothing of the sort we are trying now. But 3 years later, we'll be extremely successful. We'll raise another investment round, and, you know, we'll go into Series A and so on." But you've all heard about the valley of death, right? Those who create startups usually don't know how to turn startups into well-functioning businesses. They can be serial entrepreneurs, but that's it. And if we compare Silicon Valley to what we have here in Russia, we'll see a stark difference. Okay, correct me if I get anything wrong, but I understand that in Silicon Valley, there is a great emphasis made on startup entrepreneurs creating startups, but then the startups are developed further, taken to the next league by other people, and they have this competence. They know what they're doing. You can call them, say, well, we have startup entrepreneurs, but we also have people whose main competence is packaging startups into something that is, well, powerful enough to turn into something bigger. And the received wisdom is that startup entrepreneurs actually don't need this competence. Now, this begs the following question. Can a good technical, say, genius or a scientist become a businessman? Yes, he can. Can he fail? Sure. What's the borderline there? Like, how do we know what makes a good leader versus what breaks a good leader? How do we know in a particular situation what is going to work and what won't? There is no answer to this question, right? It's all about flexibility. And this is why it's so important to wrap your mind around neuroplasticity, because we need to train ourselves to better adapt to changing situations and circumstances so that we can be more agile. Something I'm saying about my daughter now. So she's attending a school where, you know, they've got lots of extra classes for special reasons. So you all know about the difference between long-term memory and working memory. So I'm asking her, now you've passed this exam? I'm just wondering what you remember of that discipline, of that course. And she says, well, nothing about this subject at all, because that was the last course we had on it. And I don't think I will ever need it. Well, she does remember some things, mostly those that provoked an emotional response. And I'm usually shocked because I sense there were lots of important things in that course that will be very handy for her for 50 more years, but she's unaware of that. And it's certainly not in her long-term memory. And again, I treat it as a metaphor for modern leaders who need to change, they need to adapt, and they are told, you know what? we've got a 5-year study program for you. It's a great one. It has been tested for a century. So, when do we stop it? Well, obviously, when they realize that they can no longer perform in their current position with the knowledge they currently have, they will be interested in some new education and new knowledge versus a new diploma. That's why I think a proper business education is effectively a flexible system. Ideally, it's a marketplace, so you can, pick and choose what you need. Maybe it's running on some sort of AI that will advise you in terms of what kind of combination of skills will make you better prepared for a particular position or a career track. Which skills you need to develop on your own and which should ideally be outsourced and delegated simply because, you don't have all the time in the world to master all the courses, right? So in conclusion of this somewhat impromptu speech, I want to give you this very simple example of what, say, volatility is like in business. My friends recently went to Norway on a cruise. And they have very specific plans for this cruise, like they knew exactly which scenic spots they were going to visit, they loved the photos, they wanted to sort of live this experience. However, the weather turned out to be ugly, so they never got to see any of those scenic spots. And I asked them, now, are you feeling really down because of that? And they said, no. The cruise ship crew delivered this great story. They told us, you know what? We've completely rehashed the program. We are going to show you places you've never ever seen. They are not even in the photos that are available on our website, and you're going to absolutely enjoy and love them. They could have given their tourists what they had in their agenda, something that had been tested and tried for so many years, but they adapted, and their customers loved it. So I'm thinking education should be the same. And if you don't have fundamental, classic education, like if your writing skills are lousy, if your arithmetic is no good, well, you may actually build something on top of it, but then if you talk to people and they see that you are lacking basic culture, anything else you've tried building up on top of that will look like a cherry on a pie, but the pie will be missing. So proper education is a foundation, and therefore we need providers of fundamental systemic education services. We also need them to tell students how they can decide what combination of skills and courses will be important for their particular objective. And I personally believe that those who don't change and don't learn today, they won't be here tomorrow. They won't be here next year. Not because they're bad, right? It's just that they're going to be left out. The train will leave the station. So the world belongs to those who communicate and develop. That's why I started this speech by referencing soft skills. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nothing impromptu about that talk. The focus on flexibility, adaptability, agility, a business education, very, very profoundly important concepts, as well as the necessity as business educators to focus on adaptive leadership as well. So thank you very, very much for that. Now to my left is my wonderful colleague, Andrew Main Wilson. Andrew is Chief Executive Officer of both AMBA and BGA, and has done an extraordinary job in building both footprints during his tenure at that organization. I just attended his initial session at 9:30 and glad to have you with this one.
Tim, thank you very much for your kind words. Okay, what I thought I would do for these next 10 to 12 minutes is talk through what I see as the biggest 3 changes that will affect what businesses need from management education over the next 3 years. The first and the most fundamental change I believe we'll see over these next 3 years is a move towards the importance of lifelong learning. So if you think of a business school mentality or a university mentality at the moment, you tend to think of a student coming to you for a 1 to 3 year relationship, doing a degree, and then becoming an alumnus, maybe someone that you don't see again, possibly ever, and just have an email relationship with. And what's happening now is that organizations are starting to realize that a student should not be looked at as a 3-year asset, but you should look to build a relationship from day one, because the business school has the first grab of that student. It's the first serious educational relationship, but has a relationship for 30 to 40 years. And a couple of days ago, I received this email from LinkedIn. LinkedIn now have about 15,000 business and management related courses online, and they're offering all of them to you if you just make a 1-year commitment at $20 a month. Now this is pretty disruptive stuff. They don't do research. That is solely the prerogative and skill of a university or a business school. But does that matter if LinkedIn, with now its 500 millionth member, so 7% of the world's population are now members of LinkedIn. That's virtually the entire business community worldwide. And they have the CV and detail of every single one of those members. Career background, current job, current salary, where they work. And what LinkedIn are doing is offering all these business courses to 500 million people, but they're trying to tailor each one of those courses to the individual member. So they have your CV, they know what your career has been, they send you a questionnaire, ask you what your ambition is to be in 5 years' time. They then look at their 10 million job advertisements, do a keyword search on the job advertisement, which are the key skills needed in the job you want in 5 years' time, and they will send you emails tailor-making the relevant courses from that 15,000, the ones that you need for your career. And it's going to be at $5 a month. That's pretty disruptive stuff. I'd like to then take you to the other extreme. In terms of cost per week, the world's most expensive business school course, which is the Harvard Business School Advanced Management Program. I was very fortunate to be an AMP alumnus. I did the AMP at Harvard 20 years ago. It still remains, and I've been chief exec of AMBRA and BGA for 6 years. It's the best program I have ever experienced, but it is $82,000. And it was 2.5 months when I did. It's now down to 7 weeks, because with CEO education, time is money, and CEOs can't give 2.5 months now. But it's $82,000 for 7 weeks. Their target audience is not 500 million young business people, but it's 100 future CEOs. So if you look at that disruption, the Harvard AMP program is $12,000 a week. And LinkedIn's learning of 15,000 courses is $5 a week. So where does the future for management education lie in this huge variety? And it's no coincidence that last year, Harvard rebranded their experimental online programs and now call it Harvard Business School Online. And they will be targeting, with more expensive online programs than the rest of the market, serious online learning at conventional business schools, and anyone who'll pay a premium for over their lifetime for Harvard learning. If we then look at the disruptors in this digital learning area, who do we have? So we have Coursera, the first in the market. They've raised £200 million for their product. edX, the number 2, and I've been speaking to their CEO, they've raised 100 million to invest in online learning. And FutureLearn, and I met with their CEO in London last week, have raised $65 million. So if you think of a business school gearing up for online education to go with the best of face-to-face. Serious investment is required against brands who don't have campuses, never want a campus, don't do research, never want to do research. What they're offering potential business managers and leaders is what they would call practical just-in-time learning. And then the big dilemma around all of this is how much will LinkedIn spend? But then sustainability, all these companies are virtually giving away education. And this is the first time this has ever happened. They are giving away education. And by the way, some of these modules are not bad. They're not just a series of PowerPoint presentations. There's interactive video. There is some synchronous learning within a group. They're getting more sophisticated all the time. So where does the business school lie within this? And where is the sanity in this madness of giving all this content away at an example like $5 a week? So if I look at how some of the top business schools are reacting, 6 top schools from 4 continents have realized they can't match this on their own. They want to offer the best of practical management education on campus face-to-face with the best of online learning. And so 6 initial business schools have teamed together, and this is not just signing a memorandum of understanding. They're customizing an online education IT system, so they've all got to have the same IT. And they're redefining and digitizing all their conventional existing program portfolio. So if you are working for a business school or you're a student at a business school, just like the airline alliances, there'll probably only be 4 or 5 of these globally that get brand footholds. You know, in your country, are you going to be the partner of the Future of Management Education Alliance or one of these other brands? Because you don't want to be at the disco and say, I'm waiting to dance with someone better, and then at the end of the evening you find you're the last person on the dance floor, all on your own. I believe that the business school way forward is to offer the best of both worlds. Face-to-face learning still has an enormous value, as does the networking face-to-face with senior faculty and the facilities of a university. But the clever business schools are starting to bring in some of the artificial intelligence technology to be the best of both worlds, the best of digital and the best of face-to-face. And one example here that you might like to think about is Lancaster Business School in the UK have done a deal with Amazon's Alexa to replace classroom assistants. And so what started off as the students signing an Amazon Alexa app, at which they could say, where's my next lecture? What do I need to prepare? Who is the professor? As more and more intelligence is gathered by Amazon Alexa, every single lecture is either videoed or audio recorded and fed into Alexa. So a student will say, I don't understand this point of Professor Jones's lecture last week. Alexa, can you explain to me what the professor meant by this? And Alexa is now beginning to answer qualitative questions like that. Alexa can spot a student struggling by the questions they ask and alert the faculty to it. So I see much of this smart digital technology of using big data and artificial intelligence coming in to convince businesses and students that an on-campus plus the best of digital will be the best way forward. The Business Graduates Association, we launched, Tim kindly mentioned it, January of last year. It's only been going 11 months. Over 100 schools have already joined around the world. And I think it's probably because of 3 reasons. We focus on what we believe are the 3 big management issues of the next 5 years: responsible management and sustainability. A positive impact, proving to employers that this student is so well educated, they're ready for work and will get the best jobs. And then a commitment to lifelong learning, evaluating learning over a 30-year period, not a 2 or 3 year degree course duration. And just finally, my final slide, I feel that our schools should leverage 3 competitive advantages to survive and thrive in this changing world. Number 1, none of these other digital or virtual companies, they don't want any real estate. So turn the facilities of a campus to an advantage. Secondly, provide the best of face-to-face learning and digital learning. And thirdly, and some would question this, but most business schools have up to 50 years of faculty knowledge building and the ability to teach in an interactive way and do research. They need to make that count against other companies coming in and disrespecting past knowledge because they believe they can offer future knowledge. Tim, back to you. Thank you.
Andrew, thanks for raising those fascinating insights. Your close connectivity with 300 schools in AMBA, 100 and growing, BGS, sort of reflects on-the-ground observations that give us much to think about in this whole dynamic of mergers and acquisitions among business schools, direct fund investment in business schools, demergers. It's a rapidly changing landscape, and I think Andrew captured a lot of the spirit of what's happening in our world. Now it's a great pleasure for me to introduce my wonderful friend and colleague and AACSB board member, Sergey Miasodov. Sergey is Vice Rector of RANEPA, but also Dean of IBS here at RANEPA. Thank you for being such a gracious host and for your comments and observations this morning.
Thank you very much, Tim. As far as I am plus minus bilingual, I shall try to speak on the mixture of two languages. And I shall start with the fact that IBS Moscow RANEPA переводится на русский язык как ИБД Aronchik. It's tricky. If you do not know that, you won't be able to translate. И как раз вот это основная позиция, основной фокус моего выступления.
Now that's the key focus of my statement. Now, at first I thought that together with Alan, we are two deans here, and it would be great to defend the business schools that are under attack. So first, you can't talk about abstract business schools, abstract business education. Now, if you are really serious about business education, you should know that the management program as your first degree in higher education and the MBA or executive retraining for major corporates, these are three completely different products. And based on my experience, one and the same team of teachers, of professors, cannot do all of them. As we say, we need to provide custom-made, tailor-made products. But again, you don't have batches of customers in one segment. You'd have one or two people who need one thing. MBA is now oriented to just a hand-picked needs of a particular company. Or maybe, or rather, we should reorient to the B2C customers, where most of the people have to pay out of their pocket. And many of the programs, given the same name, would feature completely different content. And as president of the Russian Association of Business Education, about 24 of business schools have not been renamed, with all due respect to our universities. Now, say you had the Department of Economics, and you call it an MBA school, but then the business community would attack us, saying that, well, you're giving us the same lectures. MBA is an exchange of experience, while a master's degree is where you're given lectures. So you need completely different professors. So different segments would give you different customers. So I know a lot of colleagues from other business schools, and I know that B2C for MBAs accounts for a share of between 50 to 70 customers. People pay money out of their own pocket. So actually they could have purchased a foreign-made car here in Russia. And I know that the president will speak today about the economic situation. People are struggling. Income has remained flat in the past several years, and I know that the B2C market believes that they can get for MBA programs what they want. People vote with their feet. The key tool of enrollment is not advertising. Again, you have a long-term program for adults. You cannot check the quality. You'll have the same reviews. You only need to talk to the people, to your friends, who have completed or graduated from those programs. It all relies on word of mouth. Friends bring their own friends, and if that market is growing, and we see it's growing, then it means that that's the right way. So those who criticize MBA, 99% of them, they have never done an MBA, so they just invent some stuff about MBA and then they preach it. So I particularly lay it on thick so that I can defend business schools. So we're talking about different customer, about different interests. So I will no longer talk about business schools. I don't want to say that B2C works in a premium segment, that the number of enrollment is growing. And the past several years have seen prosperity for business schools that want to seek alliances with other international schools who want to introduce new technology, new programs. They are great, but why are we criticized? Why don't we always cater to the needs of major corporates? And here's an interesting point that was voiced yesterday at the supervisory board and head of a Euro clinic talked about it, and they now want to set up a business school for healthcare managers. And it was also voiced by Mr. Vladimir in the previous session. Colleagues, we seem to overlook the fact that industries use different languages. We are entering a multicultural world. We are introducing new programs that become multifaceted. Astrochemistry, how about that? Biophysics, neurolinguistics. You get it. So you always have several subjects combine, a blended discipline. So please don't accuse me that I underestimate fundamental education here in Russia. We had a conference of heads of universities, and Mr. Sadovnichi, who is head of the Moscow State University, and he always used to say that I'm a graduate of the one of the faculties in Moscow State University. And then I came to the stage and I said, well, I'm happy that I'm not an engineer. I'm happy that I'm not a physicist. I come from a different university. I'm proud of that. We need different scientists and researchers. But indeed, we do have very good mathematicians. We do have very good engineers. But we talk about management. And Peter Brook's words should not be overlooked. That culture eats a strategy for breakfast.
Strategy for breakfast, says Peter Drucker. What does it mean? If we are from different cultures, we do not quite understand each other. Если мы из другой культуры, мы не до конца друг друга понимаем. И когда у нас
And when we have good professors, good academics, good engineers, and then they are told, well, you need a manager, someone who will organize everything. Then there's a pause. Okay, we wanted to do a data scientist management, and we started to, we wanted to partner with some universities, and some of the companies told us, well, that Goldsmith University, they're all about liberal arts. No, it's not about data science. Data science is fintech. We're talking about data science management. We want to teach managements to understand what data science is all about, what kind of algorithms you have, and how you can better introduce these algorithms in their companies. So we're talking about this cultural bridge. Well, the founding father of Russian space travel, Mr. Korolev, said, there are mathematicians, they calculate the trajectory, there are engineers, they do the missiles, and there are organizers, who we in the Western world call managers. And these organizers, directors, they bring all of them together. They calculate the budget, they look for the necessary resources, hire new people, and they keep this company or keep this enterprise ticking. So we are now facing disruptive technologies, and now we are trying to connect those who are behind those disruptive technologies with the organizers who would help to roll it out, to introduce it in particular companies. And again, going back to your story about the captain should not know that. He has high-level goals. He needs to have several people around who would look at what these professional mathematicians, physicists have done and tell that captain, here's the algorithm that they've developed, and if they fine-tune it, it could be a great fit for our company, but it's really difficult to explain it, because mathematicians, engineers and managers live on different planets and use different language, even the Russian language. And they seem not to understand each other. And this is a great challenge for us currently. And I'm sure that other countries have the same challenge, because professional jargon is too separate. We need bridges. We need bridge people who would connect these people. Otherwise, we won't be able to have neurobiology or astrochemistry or neurodata science management. They won't be applied in real life. And here's a big challenge. You need to retrain our own professors. I made a joke earlier. We came to a company 3 years ago. That was a joke I made at the previous session. So we came to a company and they say, we'll take your students for an internship. But, okay, they need to train 1 month. And then, based on agile and other blah, blah strategies, they need to do a sort of a TED session at Gaidar. Well, I've been in this industry for 30 years. What? What did they say? So, and, okay, translated, it would mean that you need extra flexibility to take those values during a short time, and then you have to explain what you have gained during that internship. Yes, TED sessions, pitch sessions, that's jargon, and that's the jargon for millennials, and the jargon for the Zoomers. We also have this linguistic gap between different generations. So as part of business schools, we cannot just produce cheese in general. We need to produce cheese of 30 varieties and customize it to certain groups of our customers. So just customer-driven approach will not work. So we're moving from general stuff to small groups to tailor-made products, and that's the biggest challenge, because We'll have to reimagine the entire system of running business schools, higher flexibility, ICT, retraining our professors, online education. Practitioners need to come to us. They should not know how to teach, and we need to help them. And our professors must become of the same quality as practitioners. So if we are able to do that, if we're able to deliver on that, then our business schools would be able to have a say in the future, and Vladimir will look at us with a smile. But if we only produce cheese in general, then I'm afraid business schools as a product might just disappear in a couple of decades' time. They will leave a long-lasting legacy, but it will be just a legacy.
Sergey, fantastic insights. I too love Drucker's comment about culture eats strategy for breakfast and your defense of business schools, but also reinforcing the need to adapt, to be flexible, to be agile, and is very, very important, and thank you for that. All right. If we can applaud these four presenters, we're going to switch. Give us 1 minute.
Fine, that's absolutely fine. How did that go on?
You've been asked to come back again.
Oh, okay, great. I like that. Super. Okay, thank you again for your patience. Let's continue this this pace. We've got I think some extraordinary corporate perspectives for this second half of the panel. Please help me welcome Elizaveta Osetinskaya, who is a journalist and founder of The Bell, an e-publication, and Russians Are Okay, a video blog, and two extraordinary efforts to engage with different sectors. And Elizaveta, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me here. So I will speak Russian because my communication abilities dramatically increase with switching into Russian. So I want to use this competitive advantage. Я думаю, что большинство из вас задается вопросом,
Well,
что я здесь делаю, помимо
I guess a lot of you are scratching their heads and asking themselves, what am I doing? Usually my role would be to moderate, but, well, no. There's a reason why it's appropriate for me to talk about business education. And actually it's a twofold. The Bell as a media, and I'm sure you're well of that, and the Russian Norm as a video blog, views itself as a community. The concept that the media is a community is not new, and the Bell and the Russian OK, Russians Are Okay, that's the name of the blog, it's all about successful businessmen. And it was actually built as a response to the needs of entrepreneurs And the bottom line was to connect them to the world of information, to help them internationalize. And over time, we realized that one of the greatest needs for entrepreneurs is education. Not education as an institution, but as knowledge that you need to update and keep relevant. And the second reason that makes it appropriate for me to talk about education is as follows. I'm the product of the Russian and international education systems. This is why I could dub myself an interesting media manager. So I attended a blended course, Russian London School, and then I went to Stanford. So I don't think there are many people like me. So I have a twofold perspective. I can talk with my consumer's hat on and someone who's seen those systems from a different perspective. Now, what are the needs? What is the need for knowledge for an entrepreneur? The average age of people who get a master's degree, that's about 22, 23 years. What about MBA? 28. The average, on average, successful companies are founded at 45. Now, what's the difference? 17 years. So what was 17 years before that day? 17 years ago, we never had Uber, or the concept known as Uberization, or Facebook. We used to have BlackBerry. BlackBerry was much more popular. So can you exist for 17 years without access to knowledge? No. But if you get continuous training for 17 years, you don't have time to do business. Now, if you have ever run a company, you understand you don't have time and a single second to raise your head and look elsewhere. So the ambition to get education, of an institutional type, to have a face-to-face education for a year or two, that's an illusion. And it's not about money. Entrepreneurs live to make money, but they cannot spend so much time on a thing called education. But we all know that demand creates supply. So here's the way we decided to address it. We wanted to give the best from international education to our entrepreneurs. Now, what's the difference between the Russian business education, and not just business education, the education system in general, and the international system that I observed for quite some time? First of all, it's all about the style of communication and your relationship between the lecturer, tutor, professor, and students. Business leaders are honored to come to students and share their own experience. Now, what happens before that? There's a painful process where they would, you would have to listen to the decisions, the poor decisions that this businessman has ever done, to the criticism of his managerial skills. Can you imagine anyone from top 200 of Russian Forbes that would be ready to listen to the criticism from who? From students. No, I don't think they would be able to stand such criticism or want to come to teach them. Now, second, there's a great difference in terms of how you design new products to be launched. So at first we had BlackBerry with buttons, and then we switched on to iPhone-style products without buttons. So business schools said, well, actually it was some kind of design thinking or lean style. I'm sure you're well aware of those notions, but perhaps you are less aware what's behind. So we did an experiment. We said, hey, here's a short program. Design thinking, lean startup, that's the core. And communication skills, soft skills. And as we said, there's a huge difference between the way we communicate and the way they communicate. It's no worse, it's not better. You just need to know the difference. You need to be able to explain to the lecturers, to the people, so that they can reach out to the outer world, or you need to teach the students to be able to reach out to the outer world. You need to have a TED pitch or just any pitch. You need to train yourself so that you know how you can reach out to an international audience in a better way. So I don't want to take too much time or too much of your time. So here's my projection based from my routine and professional observations. Both other countries and Russia have huge hubs of knowledge, crown jewels of knowledge. The Ivy League and RANEPA and Moscow State University and the New Economic School and many others. So these centers of knowledge, to be honest, do not always connect to the business, do not always respond to the needs of the business community. They cannot always design the right products that the business community requires here and now. That's an evolving process, but what I see going forward is that there will be, willy-nilly, a lot of useful intermediaries, both companies and institutions, between the two, between the companies and business schools, that will bridge the gap, that will connect them, that will formulate the right need. And Forbes and the Bell will play a key role in that. We need to communicate. We know how to communicate. And we'll communicate with both sides. We'll act as an intermediary. Digital platforms are key here. They'll catch up. Although offline will still remain important. Face-to-face communication is increasingly important. You need to remain in contact with those who you've taught and those you've received teaching from. This is invaluable. Thank you.
Elizaveta, thank you very much. One of the things that Elizaveta did not emphasize with her publications is they create communities. And what so many are looking for today are these reference groups to identify with, conveners like Elizaveta that bring, whether it's entrepreneurs, business people, together to learn and share from one another. So thank you so very much for those insights. Now it's a pleasure for me to welcome Neil Sturrock. Neil is president of PepsiCo, and I want to get this right, for Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Caucasus, and Central Asia. So welcome. We're very honored to have you, and thank you for participating in this panel.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. And you got it right exactly. That's my responsibility. You know, to be honest, I feel a little bit out of place amongst all these very clever people. And as I was sitting in the front row, I was wondering to myself, when did I last feel this uncomfortable or so stupid? And okay, so we're together on this. And I decided it was about 10 years ago when I was actually then running PepsiCo's Ukraine business, which I kind of still run, but it's only part of my territory now, probably about 10% of it. And we were doing a film about our business in Ukraine in our factory in Nikolaev in the south of Ukraine. And I had to, as the general manager, I had to make a few sort of words of explanation, high level, the sort of helicopter speech as we call it. And I had to do it in English, and I had to do it actually then in Russian, because Nikolaev was very much a, sort of language there was balanced between Russian and Ukrainian. And I was struggling so much with the English presentation and making mistakes. And we hadn't even got on to the Russian or the Ukrainian part. But I overheard the cameraman say to the makeup specialist, who they obviously didn't realize that I spoke Russian reasonably well, and I overheard them say, "How could such a stupid guy run such a big business?" So I hope by the end of this discussion you're not feeling the same as those guys in Nikolaev that day. Anyway, listen, a couple of words about PepsiCo. I think you probably know a fair bit about our company, but we're a big global company with a little bit over $60 billion of turnover globally. And Russia is one of the biggest markets for us, depending on the exchange rate between the peso and the ruble. Russia or Mexico is the second biggest business for PepsiCo globally. So this is a very important market. We've been here 60 years. So we feel ourselves a local company. And, I think our success is because we follow a sort of broad PepsiCo approach in Russia as we do globally, and that's a very clear vision to be the number one player in the convenient food and beverage sector. And as a vision and as a mission, we want to sort of put more and more smiles on the faces of our consumers every time they drink our products or eat our food products. Our approach is to become faster, stronger, and better. And faster means more consumer-centric, understanding what our consumers want, dealing with our retail partners as partners, not as customers, and executing perfectly in store. Stronger means taking any unnecessary costs out of our business so we can reinvest it in growth, in our people, in capability, in technology, etc. It means becoming more capable, becoming simpler, becoming digitally savvy and digitally enabled. And it means, and I was delighted to hear a couple of people already talking about culture, it means having a winning culture and a culture that works, that has everyone on the same page. And finally, I think the most important thing in our approach is that we want to be a better company. And we think, no matter why, for me, it's because that's how I feel. I want to leave the planet in a better condition when I leave the planet than it was when I joined the planet. And that's my personal agenda, and I think it's the company's as well. But even if we didn't care about that, I think companies anyway need to be better. And by better, we mean a sustainable agricultural system, dealing with packaging waste and all waste the right way. And even if we didn't feel it ourselves, I think society will hold us accountable. Our shareholders will hold us accountable, and the regulators will hold us accountable. So that's an absolute imperative. In Russia, as I said, we have a huge business. We play in 6 categories. I asked one of my staff for a presentation the other day. I said, just remind me how many brands we have in this part of the world, in the 10 countries that we look after. And it took them 2 weeks to come back with an answer. We have so many. It turns out we have, I think, 55 brands. And you'll know some of our global brands, Lay's, Pepsi, 7-Up, etc. You're probably not aware that Hrustim, crisp breads are ours, that we have a huge dairy business, Domek Vederevia, Chuda, Agusha is our brand. We talked, I think, Sergey talked about 30 types of cheese in your presentation. Well, Lambert is our brand, the biggest Russian cheese brand. And we don't have 30 types, but it's probably a good innovation idea that we will get to 30 types. But we have a very broad business. J7, Fructovisad, Lubimi are our juice brands as well. We have a very big business here. We have 20,000 employees, 20 plants. We're one of the two biggest buyers of raw milk from farms. So we're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of farms buying every day. And we're the biggest industrial purchaser of potatoes for our potato chip business. And our factory in Kashira is PepsiCo's biggest snacks plant in the world. And we're now in the process of building another plant in Novosibirsk. Now, let me get back to this subject. I just want to give you a little bit of perspective about who PepsiCo is and who we are in Russia. So, in terms of our approach to education, let's call it perhaps more broadly capability. I would characterize it using three terms. I would say we're practical, we're committed, and I think we're forward-looking. And just as an example, if you think about this great growth in the snacks business, I just told you that the plant in Kashira is the biggest plant in the world for PepsiCo. 10 years ago, when it wasn't, we started a program with Russian universities called Leaders of Agriculture, because we knew we were going to have to build capability in our partners. We've invested over $1 million over those 10 years. We're working now with, or have worked over that period with 11 different universities in the south of Russia, because we have a plant in Azov, in Novosibirsk, in Moscow as well. So we understand the need to partner. Our investments are for equipment at the universities, for grants, for students, and even an exchange program with Cornell University. So I would say, to me, it's a pragmatic example. It shows our commitment, and it was future-looking, because at the time we didn't need it. But we knew we would need to deepen these relationships, and we did it. Graduates are very important to us, with or without master's degrees. We have a program called PepsiGo, which has been running for 5 years, where we take on students as interns. And I think the most pleasing thing is that typically 50% of those who join as an intern end up working for us after they leave university as well. Through the success of this PepsiGo, we've introduced an accelerated program which is called Breakout, where we promise graduates who meet our expectations an accelerated career development. We launched that last year. There were 3,000 applications. We took on 15. And what's interesting there, of course there was a screening process, but at the end of the day, the biggest driver of the selection process was a sort of business simulation that we took people through. So we tried to, cut through not just the academic credentials, but the practical business abilities as well. And we're very, it's very early, but we're very happy with that program. Let me talk to you a little bit about leadership and maybe my role, and this can also give us some feel for what might be needed in the future from management education, because the world is changing. I think we've talked about digitalization. We've also talked about the social pressures, the power of social media, etc. I mean, the world is changing faster than any of us can possibly change. And there's a big question whether a dinosaur like me, who joined PepsiCo 30 years ago, actually 31 years ago, is fit for purpose to run a business like this in such a changing environment. And we just think about digitalization. There's so much changing here. I'm a big football fan, but now we've got to a point where the most exciting moment of a football match is not when they're playing, but it's actually when they can't make a decision and they go, what they call in English, they go upstairs to the video assisted referee, VAR. It's becoming a sort of a great expression in the UK, VAR. But because the referee can't make the decision, and so they use the digital tool to make a decision. It's incredibly exciting. My son, who's at university in the UK, he buys his shoes online. Now, that's probably completely okay for most of the students in that room, but I just can't get that. How you could buy shoes online. My daughter found her boyfriend online. I mean, the world is digitizing, and this has massive impact for our, potential impact for our business. I got a text from my wife a while ago, and it just said, "Hey, this looks good," and it was a photograph from inside a store of a new package, so design, not a new product, but a new package design that we'd launched. And she said, "Hey, this looks great." And then I opened that photograph up a little bit, and underneath this new package, which did indeed look great, there was a yellow tag saying, minus 30%. So I sent her a message back and said, "Yeah, and the price looks good as well." She said, "I didn't notice." And, of course, my wife is perhaps not exactly the average consumer, but it just struck me how this, when a big chain runs a promotion, they run a promotion and everyone gets that price. But there's plenty of people like my wife who would have bought it at a higher price, and there's plenty of people who wouldn't buy the product because that price was still too high. And the availability of data and the ability of data scientists to process data incredibly fast unlocks potential like personalization of promo. Because through loyalty card data, the big chains begin to know who buys what, and if someone's buying the products when they're off promotion, you probably don't need to offer them the products on promotion. And why am I telling you this story? The reason is, and I heard it, I think it was in Sergei's presentation, but the need to sort of bridge what incredible breadth and depth of data can do for a business. You've got leaders like me who know we need to spend less on promotion so we can spend more on developing our brands. And then we've got a capability which is emerging of this sort of mass processing of data and analysis of that. But we need to bridge that and turn this new data and digitalization capability into business benefit. And the question is, can leaders like I play that bridging role? Now, PepsiCo's approach to that, I think, is very innovative, and it comes back again to this pragmatism. So what we've introduced within PepsiCo Europe is, all of you know about mentoring, I think, right? You're new in a company or you're in middle management, and you have a mentor who's more senior than you who can guide you because you don't know the way around the company. You could make some mistakes. You need to learn more about the history, the products, etc. And you have a mentor. So what we've introduced for leaders like me is reverse mentoring. So now I'm mentored by our head of digital marketing. And every 3 weeks we have sort of breakfast or a cup of coffee together. And she's training me in what digitalization, what mass processing of data, means and could do. She opens up that black box for me, and then I can sort of begin to align the rest of our organization on the potential benefits of that to our business. And again, I say that because that's how pragmatically PepsiCo is developing sort of capability and educating people in this very fast-changing world. But I think it's what sort of business schools really need to think about is how can you create that capability for my successor and the successors of my successor, for them to be able to bridge, because as one of you said, no one is going to know everything, but you need to know where to go and where to get what's going on, so that you can monetize technology. So that's one of my big messages. I did want to come back to a couple of other points very briefly. I talked about our commitment to become a better company, and again, I don't think we can rely on a function within our company to sort of be responsible for healthy products, packaging that's recyclable, etc. I mean, we need to have functions that are doing that. To me, it's absolutely critical that everyone in our company and everyone in a decision-making role has that knowledge of the environmental impact of everything that we do, from our partnership with agriculture, the CO2 emissions from delivering product, the packaging waste that is at this stage a somewhat inevitable result of selling packaged products, although I would like to emphasize that in Q4 of 2019, for the first time in Russia, we started making our plastic bottles from recycled plastic bottles, not just recycled plastic, but recycled plastic bottles. So that's our commitment to managing packaging waste, and we make them in Solnechnogorsk, just outside Moscow. So this is truly a local solution. But I do think on the curriculum of every business or master's degree, environmental impact, social impact has to be there. So I won't, I could go on forever on this single subject, but I think it's absolutely critical, because we can't rely on a few people to guide us there. We need our marketing people as committed to produce what we call future-proof products as our sort of production people. I think there's, a couple of, and I just want to add actually there, it's very important to add, and perhaps one of the reasons why I'm here today is we actually have just, we've been working with RANEPA for 5 years, although it's still disappointing to see our competitors' products on the stand and not ours, so we'll do, not even one of our 55 brands. But we've been working with them for 55 years, and 5 years, sorry, and we strengthened the relationship in 2009, and we will be setting up socially oriented courses with them. So that's our commitment to do that here in Moscow, in this building. Finally, I think just a couple of words on the soft skills, and I'm saying even not just skills, but behaviors. Because the longer I've been in business, the more I value fundamentally good behaviors as perhaps more important than experience and skill. People who are committed to do the right thing. Committed, we don't just need people who complain about environmental problems and then throw their rubbish away in the wrong basket. We need people who are fundamentally committed to do the right thing. We need people who are agile. We have a new word. We've talked about agile and flexible a lot today. We have a word in PepsiCo, which, along with lifelong learning, which we're also committed to, it's unlearning. So we need to be, especially people like me, but anyone in our organization who's been there more than 5 years, with the degree and the speed of change, people need to be ready to unlearn what they know or how they did things and be very flexible to change, and not everyone is, and this is a critical behavior. And then from a financial point of view, and I'm sure some of you are studying finance, with this speed of change, our old models, of our payback models, when we used to invest in some new equipment and we would calculate the IRR, the internal rate of return, or the net present value, or the payback over a 12-year period, this is nonsense. With some of these, digital developments, you need a 18-month or 12-month payback, because who knows if that technology is going to be the technology that's going to be fit for purpose in 12 or 18 months' time. So there's an awful lot of change, and I was actually delighted to hear the first panel discussion, because I think you're absolutely on the right lines in terms of giving business what it needs, the bridge between the specialists and the leaders, the culture of the organization, because young people today, they want responsibility. They don't want to be told what to do. I can't tell my kids what to do. They do what they want. The only thing that I can hope is that I get them on the same page as me, that the 10 things that are important to me are the 10 things that are important to them. And then I can sleep at night like a baby, knowing that they're in another continent, but they're doing about what I had hoped them to be doing. Now, employees and new employees, they want the same. So culture, and understanding what's important to each other is absolutely important. So I was delighted to hear the first panel discussion. I'm going to stop now. You're looking at me like I've spoken for too long, and thank you for your time.
Actually, Neil, be glad for you to continue. Here we go, if you'll pass that down, please.
Okay.
But let me just highlight a couple of things. One was Neil's reference to Pepsi Go, the internship initiative at Pepsi. We haven't talked a lot about that, but a very important bridge between business education and the world of business, and a very sophisticated program at Pepsi. He talked mightily about social and environmental impact. Very important topic today in business schools worldwide, about emotional intelligence, soft skills, but also about behaviors. It's not what we say, it's what we do. And your message came loud and clear. And finally, I love the three words: faster, stronger, better. Good takeaways for business educators as well. So thank you so much for that. Now I'm pleasure to introduce Christopher McCormick. Christopher is an educator, but is Chief Academic Officer, Director of Academic Affairs for EF Education First, where he develops both educational content and programs. So, Christopher, thank you for joining us and for participating in this panel.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for your time this morning. And I also want to give a special thanks to the interpreters. I've been listening to the English translations, and it's been outstanding work, and I know what challenging work that is. So thank you for your hard work. I'm one of those rare species of Americans. I'm from Texas, but my first visit to Russia was in 1988. So a lot has changed since my first time around. I was a university student when I came here the first time, and it's always a pleasure to come back and visit with you again and receive such a warm welcome. Thank you for having me. I work with EF Education First, which is a global education provider, and we work with our sister organization, HALT Ashridge Executive Education. And I'm here today to share some perspectives and some considerations to help us think a little bit more about where are we going with management education in the future. We only exist because people have a gap in what education has provided. We are only here as private trainers to fulfill a need when people come to us. So we're really the product of after education. So once you've left, you're coming to us to help you solve a particular problem, usually with urgency. So I'm here to share some insight into some research that we have done and data we have collected just because of the operations that we do. We have about 52,000 staff around the world in about 117 countries. We operate 600 schools and offices as well around the world, covering everything from youth education to executive education. Now, I'm here representing EF Corporate Solutions, and we work with about 2,500 companies and governments around the world. And just in the last 5 years, we've had about 2 million students in our programs. So we generate lots of data. We get lots of insight on what people need in the workplace today. And I think this insight can help us think more about these questions, about the future of management education. The very first thing I want to highlight is just this idea of volatility. As Vladimir mentioned earlier, we're working in a very uncertain time. There's lots of change around us. And we use this phrase VUCA quite often to represent this. But what I want to highlight, and what my own experience is that VUCA is very personal. Everybody experiences change in different ways, and everyone has life-changing moments that make you rethink who you are and what you're doing. And this happens after you've left education. This happens when you're out there building your career. Now, these are some moments from my own life I wanted to share. I live in London part-time, and I live in Lucerne part-time. And in London, we are living through the hell of Brexit, which is the most divisive question we've had for a generation or more. And it's something that changes economics, it changes investment decisions, hiring decisions, but it also changes dynamics at home It's dividing families, it's dividing friendships, and it's a very challenging time for all of us who have been living through it. My partner is a British diplomat and has been working on the Brexit puzzle. So I've seen firsthand just how difficult and toxic it can be. The second picture is from my time in China. This represents the automation monster. And you think about how automation is changing the nature of work and the future of work. And in China, we have the unique experience of running a network of 300 schools around China, working with young children, university students, and professionals. And what's interesting is that in mainland China today, there are some 300 million people studying English. And that English desire is representative of the problem of future learning. They're using English to be able to develop skills that will take them past the risk of not having a job. There are more automated robots going into assembly lines produced in China than university graduates going into the workforce. So you think about where is that heading into the future? What kind of skill set do you need? And the last picture is more about political divisiveness and conflict and what can happen in that kind of uncertainty when all of us are experiencing different relationships or operations. This is actually a picture from my time living in Sri Lanka, and this is outside my front door. So these were protests that were regularly organized to protest against the British government, and I happen to live next to the British embassy. So every day people were trucked in and told to protest. And so we also had to learn how to deal with a very scary environment that was very uncertain and possibly dangerous. All of these experiences have shaped who I am. They've shaped decisions that I make. They've also placed a huge importance for me on the value of intercultural understanding and being able to think about the development of the soft skills that have been mentioned before, about how to work with people who are very different from you and how to challenge how you think about working together in multinational and multicultural teams, because our economy is so much more global than ever before. In the operations that we do, we generate lots and lots of data because of people asking for programs. And we published a study last year that looked at global leadership and what are the lessons that people have learned in their roles that they hold now, and what did they need to know when they started those roles? What was missing? And this is where I think we start to get at the insights that could change the future of management education, because it's about reflecting on your experience. So we asked a very powerful question of many, but one that I will ask you. What do you know now that you wish you had known 10 years ago? Think about that for a moment. What is it that you have learned now in your experience that you wish you had known? What are the lessons that you could tell your former self or tell people now? Think about it for a moment. I'll share with you the highlights that we collected from over 500 leaders around the world, just to give you a sense of what this means when we talk about this reflection. We see that these results put us into three main threads. One of them was the value of experiential learning, looking at learning in all different environments, not just through formal education. But then what does that mean for developing the skills to be a reflective learner? We also saw a theme around global competence, intercultural communication, better understanding of cultural preferences and how those come to play in terms of leadership. And we also saw another strand on technology, a lot of anxiety around technology, a low-grade fear about what technology is going to do and how much is enough. What do you need to know to be able to be a leader through this? But also, what can technology do to transform professional development? How can we adopt tools in different ways? So I'll share some of those insights now. On the reflective learning part, we see an expansion in what clients are asking us to deliver, far more involved with experiential learning, being able to ground learning in what you're doing every day and what you see coming. In terms of the question, now that you've had moments to think about it, this is what people told us. They wish they had known 10 years ago how to have much better emotional intelligence, how to develop their interpersonal skills, their relational skills, leading others. Yes, technical skills were also part of it, but you can see so much of this is about the person, So much of this is about personal development. And when we're operating in this environment of VUCA, of ambiguity and uncertainty, all you have that you can rely on is yourself. So knowing yourself is going to help you have a compass to navigate the unknown. But this isn't what is normally taught. When we think about what we're training people in early on, in school and in university and in formal education, we're not teaching people self-awareness. We're not teaching them coaching skills for themselves or for others. But this is what helps people build their inner resources. It's about developing resilience for the unknown. And people learned these lessons through critical incidents, moments that happened that changed something. There was a pivot in how you see yourself. And that happened through failure. It happened through different experiences or major life events or political atmospheres at work, things that change your perspectives that you couldn't predict. So we also asked them, what do you need then at this point? Now that you know this, how does this inform your learning going ahead? And they gave us a range of learning opportunities, formal education being one of them. But it also had a lot to do with learning by doing and learning through other people, and stretch assignments and volunteering and finding other ways to gain valuable experience through, or valuable learning through experience. And crucially, of course, we see this need for emotional intelligence and intercultural competence. Because most of us now, at some point at work, deal with somebody who isn't like us. And how do you do that respectfully, with curiosity, and in a way that can move things forward? An interesting highlight as well was looking at career maturity and what the learning needs are at different stages in a career. This is something that people are not so sensitized to in business education or in management education, that what you need early on in your career is going to be very different from what you need later. And this comes from a fantastic study called the Career Derailment Study that looked at 100,000 managers around the world over a couple of decades, looking at where did careers go well and where did they go off track. And it had a lot to do with understanding that early on, specialization in a topic, quick early wins, a specialty strength, being able to take a stand and be seen, an individual performance makes you stand out, but that doesn't work so well later on. Later on, it is about delivering through other people and bringing people along with you. How can management education sensitize us to this maturity pathway that people go through? The second strand I mentioned was around global competence and building soft skills so that you can build better relationships in diverse contexts. And this has a couple of components. It has a lot to do with professional communication and language skills, but it also has to do with mindset and how you perceive others and make space for the fact that people respect different kinds of hierarchies. They respect different kinds of feedback mechanisms. So it's about making sure that you're ready to respond respectfully in any environment. But a note on language. So as we know, English is a fairly dominant language in terms of business and aviation, internet, research, science, and so forth. Today in 2020, there are 2 billion English speakers around the world. 75% of those 2 billion are not native speakers. They've had to learn it. They're learning it for professional advancement, they're learning it for curiosity and tourism, but largely it's to create opportunities. And the countries who do this really well are the ones who really promote a culture of multilingualism and have role models that use English on a world stage. But I just want to mention English because it's something we are heavily involved in. As a result of our operations, we generate lots and lots of test data. And every year we look at the working population in the world, adults over 18, and we create a world ranking of English called the English Proficiency Index. In this year's edition, we had over 2 million results in the study. We had 100 countries in the index. Russia came in 48th out of 100, so really right there in the middle. China, interestingly, was in 40th position. China has really been surging forward in investment in English education throughout the curriculum, whereas Japan, 53rd. So countries that spend the most on private training, South Korea, Japan, don't necessarily make big gains, but it comes when people understand the role of language and opportunity together. And crucially, whether it's English, whether it's Russian, whether it's Spanish, the language itself doesn't matter. What's important is to think about the organizational culture and context you're in, because language can be a driver for innovation. The more people can share a language, they can understand the common mission and the vision, they can contribute ideas. And language can also be a driver for inclusion. Your language skills should never be a barrier to being able to participate, whether that's in further training or whether that's in global mobility. Language can create opportunity. So, one note about language, though, and this has a little bit to do with technology and approaches, is that people are very unrealistic about what it takes to learn a language. And if you're starting from the beginning, 600 hours is what you need to have basic working proficiency in a role. And that's going beyond call center work. Being able to hold a meeting, to understand correspondence, 600 to 800 hours of instruction in Japanese, or in Mandarin, or in English, or in Russian. So we have to be disciplined to think about the long-term investment, starting early and getting the most out of the learning time that you have. But I also want to speak a little bit about global competence. And this is the framework from the OECD, the Organization for Education and Cooperation and Development. And if I got that right, the OECD runs the PISA assessment every few years, looking at high school student achievement around the world. And this is significant for the world of work because we can start to identify the gaps pretty early on, where the strengths are and where the gaps are. But for the first time, the OECD is starting to include global competence in their assessment, which means it's going to be embedded in state curricula in high schools and be assessed. Where it's missing is in the world of work. We don't have an OECD approach. We don't have this introduced and embedded yet in the world of work or in management education. But if you look at the different components, they're incredibly relevant. The knowledge and skills and behaviors that we need to work respectfully, to understand and appreciate perspectives, and to work for collective well-being, a shift in how we see each other and our place in the world. So it's a combination. It's more than fluency. It's more than words. It's also a mindset that keeps you open to the world. And the third strand from the research that we've been observing and what our clients talk to us is about technology. And I mentioned earlier this anxiety around technology, this awareness that we need to know more, we need to be fluent or literate with technologies. But there is a real disconnect between what the technological space is doing and how people are applying it and how they're designing for it. And just to highlight some of this, what we hear from clients and what we get requests for training, and lots of HR and L&D managers want to know more about these in terms of potential for virtual reality, augmented reality, machine learning, big data, artificial intelligence. The potentials are always about, well, it will make learning or experiences more immersive or more adaptive or more personalized. So the challenge then becomes, to what end? What are you trying to achieve with these technologies? Because what we see is a lot of technology-led decision-making. I'm going to embrace this new technology, invest in the new technology, although I have no idea how I'm going to really use this to make a difference. So what we try to push back on and say is, think of the learning outcomes. What is it that you really need achieved? Because there are real challenges with something like big data and machine learning. Yes, you can accumulate lots of data. But if you want to translate that into a learning experience, you have to design pathways. You have to make choices. You have to have a competency framework to make this make any sense, to make it coherent. But if career paths are totally unknown, if change is the only constant, how do you make that framework closed-ended? You can't. So there are some real challenges there to live up to the promise of what the bigger technologies can do versus where our education can actually deliver. So what you see are very light touch AI experiences, or very light touch VR experiences, just to give you a taste of it. I think we're very far off from real personalized pathways because of the uncertain environment that we live in. So finally, to conclude, is just 3 considerations that are on top of our mind and possibly yours for you to think about. How do we encourage organizations and business schools, formal education, to rethink how we support lifelong learning? How do we teach people to be lifelong learners and to be reflective learners and to be ready for change? Where is that in the curriculum? A second consideration, how do you project authentic leadership which is what everybody wants to be. They want to be an authentic leader. How do you do that in a third language, in a fifth language? How do you do it across borders and cultures? So what are we doing to prepare people for that authenticity? And the last question is, how do we ensure that we're not seduced by technology, but that we make sure that technology serves learning outcomes? So some food for thought. Thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate your time.
Christopher, fantastic. I loved, you talked about the maturity pathway, very important, and the three key pillars that we've got to embrace: experiential learning, global competence, and I love the connection with authentic leadership there, and accelerating learning, and that technology will be an enabler, but is probably not the immediate answer. So fantastic. Thank you very much. And it's a great segue, because at AACSB we were proud to accredit Ashridge and proud to accredit Hult as well. So it's fascinating to hear about this other side of the organization. Now, if I can, I'm going to take, at most, I'm going to borrow that, and we're going to wrap this up as quickly as I can. If I could get a little help with the slide, we'll get started. There we go. Super. Great. Great. All right. So I'm going to try to be very, very brief. I had the pleasure this past year to visit our members in 45 of our countries. As you can see, we currently have members in 102 countries or territories worldwide, 1,700 members. We're the oldest, the largest accreditor of business schools in the world, founded 104 years ago. I'm speaking in English, but I've tried to provide some translation in Russian for you, and hope I've done appropriately here. This talks about our vision, mission, and values. The vision is very important from a global perspective. Is to leverage what we do as business educators to enhance global prosperity, and we're adding now, and provide societal impact. So very, very important part of what we're doing. We think this accreditation process, and Sergey, again, very excited to have IBS as part of our constellation of accredited schools in 57 countries or territories worldwide, is among the most rigorous standards in the world. We think it demonstrates a commitment to high quality and continuous improvement, and the process for everyone varies dramatically. If you look for our pillars that really represent the foundation of what we do, this is what we believe in. We think business educators should be catalysts for innovation, should in an interdisciplinary world be co-creators of knowledge, be part of the leaders on the discussion of leadership, exactly what you just referenced, this authenticity and wherever that market is going. We think business educators should, and business schools should be hubs of lifelong learning, viewing you not as students, but as learners who are in and out, continuously looking for more. And finally, we think business schools should be enablers of global prosperity. When I look at the technologies with the most power to disrupt what we do in business education today, here they are. And it's everything from the Internet of Things to micro-learning. And that's the learning that we drive today directly to the smartphone. I was earlier this week in Nigeria. where technology is spotty, but 87% of the population has a smartphone. And of 200 million residents, it's pretty good penetration. And so micro-learning is a very important part of what we see will be delivery platforms for the future. When I talk about today's changing business school environment, I reference, if I can, these 5 issues. First of all, business schools must learn to work outside the lines. This is back to Pepsi Go and the value of internships and experiential learning and capturing that in what we do. We haven't talked much about corporate universities, and we've talked about corporate partners, but over 2,000 corporate universities globally, and that changing landscape is very, very important. Sergey talked about the innovation that's taking place in business schools, the launch of specialized master's programs, masters in management that are being very unique, the launch of more badges and digital recognition for what you're accomplishing, and also this notion of stackable credentials. Credentials you earn in executive professional education, stacking on top of traditional courses where ultimately you may end up with a degree or another professional credential. We talk about execution and creativity and innovation and entrepreneurship and how that's driving what we do in accelerators and incubators and how very important that is. And finally, exactly what Christopher just talked about, how the platforms are changing. And Andrew mentioned this so wonderfully, where we've gone from face-to-face, the pendulum swung to digital through massive delivery, and now it's sort of swinging back to blended learning and a little bit of both. And so today, as I mentioned, in each of these, we see exactly where our business schools have been innovating in each of these arenas, and we've heard examples in this panel about each of these and the uniqueness of offerings and the ability of business schools to innovate and be creative. And I'm very excited as I see the landscape. And by the way, for the business faculties that aren't innovative and aren't committed to high quality and continuous improvement, their lifespan will probably be very restricted as well, and very, very important. So when I look at this new wave of business school leadership today, I want you to think about these 8 things. First of all, it's all about innovation and creativity. And we have to reinvent what we do and how we do it. If we believe in the status quo, if we believe we've always done things one way and this is the right way, that will be a terminal, a life-ending decision for a business school. So very important. The old model, it was always about size. It was always about girth. Big was great. Today, as the panel has talked about, no more about size. It's about speed, it's about agility, and fast always beats slow. Very, very important. It's about client-centered and beginning to customize what we do and how we do it to meet your needs and your needs and your needs individually, not collectively. It's about being a skill builder, and I'm going to wrap up in a second about looking at this generational shift. It's this call for transformational leadership. Leadership in our industry must change as well because the market is shifting. And if leadership doesn't change, we miss the market and we're out of business. And finally, as Katzenbach always wrote about and talked about, it's this power of teams. No single individual, no single school may be smart enough. And so we're hearing about partnerships and alliances and collaborations is the way to approach the market. And finally, let me talk for just a minute to the young people in this room right now. You are Gen Z. That's you. Almost all of you born after 1996. And so it's an amazing, the difference in this generation. And if our schools are not acknowledging this generational tsunami, we are missing the boat. So just a couple of comments here. Again, the number is big globally, almost 2 billion strong. It's been a popular figure, hasn't it? 2 billion English speakers, 2 billion Gen Z, right? It's an important factor. And like all generations, you want things customized to your expectations, to your needs. And I want to just highlight some of these comments. You young people, you are global. You're exactly what Christopher talked about. You're multilingual, you're multicultural, and wherever you are now, it's not enough. You're social, you're visual, and you're technological as well. Very, very important. You are early adopters, and as PepsiCo knows, you are brand influencers as well. And it's seen in the social media, and this word influencer has become very powerful in our lives today. You are social media drivers and pop culture leaders. You also have a very keen commitment to social engagement and social impact. And so with that, let me thank you for your time. Let me thank the panelists again, and we're going to take maybe one question. Is that all right? One question, if you don't mind. So let's thank everybody. So who has a burning question? And we'll take one. We're honored to take one to any of our extraordinary panelists to try to wrap this session up. Take a deep breath. I know nobody is bashful. We've got a microphone here. We have a question? Yes, please. And if you'll introduce yourself, please.
Ruslan Dolzhenko, Uralский институт.
Ruslan Dolzhenkov. I'm from the Urals branch of RANEPA. I was just the boldest one because the mic was within reach. So as a follow-up, when any consumer will be able to get education within their reach, within their reach, what will we do? Would we be needed? Would business schools be needed if everyone would be able to get a education within the reach?
So, it's a tough question. Let me turn to a panelist. When we'll pass a microphone, someone wants it.
Very quickly, I would
Please.
simply say we exist because of what people still need. So it's about filling those gaps. So I think there will always be an opportunity for more providers of education to provide a framework and a direction, but the needs are always going to change. So we're occupying the space between workplace and formal education.
Мы должны оббегать бизнес.
We need to be ahead of business. We need to be faster than business so that the gap would be bigger.
Foundation still needs to be there. Absolutely. For the skills that you need technically, critical thinking to be developed, and leadership skills to be developed, absolutely. But I think there's always going to be that customized pathway.
And I think that's very fair. I think it's a partnership. I agree. I think the foundation of business education is there. But I think this generation will look to a multiple of providers to meet lifelong needs. So again, help me thank the panel again, and thank you very much for your...
Just one wish from me, if you allow me, just one wish. One wish to all the panelists. So I'm professor from Moldova, and I'm a lecturer. It's a very relevant session, but I think we also need to look at law. Law is very much needed so that they could somehow combine law and economics so that they take the right decisions. Thank you for this exciting panel.